Blood pooled in perfect crimson against the morning frost, but it wasn't the blood that made the passerby stop. It was how impossibly white everything else looked. January 15th, 1947. Betty Bersinger is walking her 3-year-old daughter to the shoe repair shop in Leimert Park, Los Angeles, when she spots what she first thinks is a broken department store mannequin lying in the vacant lot. The body is so pale, so perfectly bisected at the waist, so carefully posed that it couldn't possibly be real. But then she sees the rope marks, the cuts, the deliberate arrangement of the limbs. Elizabeth Short, 22 years old, black hair, dreams bigger than her bank account, had been found. And here's the thing, she'd been dead for days, but whoever did this to her had taken their time making sure she'd be discovered exactly like this. Staged, displayed, a piece of performance art written in flesh and blood. The newspapers would call her the Black Dahlia, after a film noir that had played in theaters that year. Elizabeth herself had never seen it. She'd been too busy trying to make it in Hollywood, waiting tables, crashing on friends' couches, sending hopeful headshots to studios that never called back. Just another pretty girl in a city full of them, until she became the most famous murder victim in Los Angeles history. But let's back up, because Elizabeth's story doesn't start in that vacant lot. It starts in Massachusetts, with a girl who collected movie magazines and painted her nails deep red and told everyone who'd listen that she was going to be a star. Her friends called her Betty. She had perfect teeth, a luminous smile, and that particular kind of optimism that only exists in young women who haven't yet learned how dangerous the world can be. She'd come to California in 1943, then again in 1946, each time with a different boyfriend, a different plan, the same dream. She stayed at the YWCA, she stayed with men she'd just met, she stayed wherever someone would have her. Elizabeth had a talent for finding temporary homes, temporary protectors, temporary solutions to permanent problems. The last week of her life, she'd been staying with a married couple in San Diego. Then she told them she was going to Los Angeles to meet her sister. There was no sister, there was no meeting. There was just Elizabeth, taking a Greyhound bus into a city that would kill her within days. Here's what the investigation revealed, piece by careful piece. Elizabeth had been held captive for several days before she died. The killer had tortured her, cut her, drained her blood. The body showed no signs of sexual assault, which puzzled investigators. This wasn't about rape. This was about something else entirely. Something colder, more methodical. The cuts were precise, surgical almost. The killer had medical knowledge, or at the very least, anatomical training. They'd bisected her body cleanly at the waist, carved a smile into her face from ear to ear. But they'd also washed her body, scrubbed it clean of evidence. They'd posed her carefully, arms above her head, legs spread like she was sleeping or performing. Now sit with that for a second. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a date that turned violent. This was someone who had time, privacy, and a very specific vision of what they wanted to accomplish. The LAPD threw everything they had at the case. They interviewed over 150 suspects, followed up on thousands of tips, pursued leads across the country. The case file eventually grew to over 3,000 pages. They questioned doctors, butchers, medical students. They looked at Elizabeth's boyfriends, her casual acquaintances, the men she'd been seen with in the days before she died. And then the killer started communicating. Letters arrived at the Los Angeles Examiner, cut and paste ransom note style from magazine letters. Here is Dahlia's belongings letter to follow. Elizabeth's purse and shoes arrived in the mail, cleaned of fingerprints, carefully wiped down. Another letter. Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified. The killer was watching the investigation, reading the newspapers, enjoying the attention. They sent more letters, more taunts, more promises to turn themselves in that never materialized. It was all performance, honey. Every bit of it. But here's where the story gets complicated, because this is Los Angeles in 1947, and the LAPD isn't exactly known for its investigative prowess. They botched the crime scene, let reporters and curiosity seekers contaminate evidence. They leaked details to the press, which meant copycat letters flooded in by the dozen. They arrested suspects based on hunches, released them when alibis checked out, moved on to the next theory without any real methodology. The case attracted confessions from mentally ill individuals, attention seekers, people who genuinely believed they might have done it. Over the years, more than 50 people would confess to killing Elizabeth Short. All of them were cleared. Suspects emerged and faded like shadows. George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles doctor whose own son would later accuse him of the murder. Walter Bailey, a surgeon who lived near the crime scene. Leslie Dillon, a bellhop with an interest in psychology who'd written to a detective about the case. Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner who'd let Elizabeth stay in his home. Each suspect seemed promising for a moment, then fell apart under scrutiny. Alibis emerged. Evidence didn't match. Witness accounts contradicted. The investigation became a maze of dead ends and false starts, complicated by media attention and public fascination that turned a murder case into entertainment. And that's the thing about the Black Dahlia case. It became bigger than Elizabeth Short almost immediately. She disappeared into her own mythology, the small-town girl with big dreams replaced by this noir fantasy of Hollywood corruption and sexual violence. The real Elizabeth, who loved the movies, who sent money home to her mother, who was probably just lonely and scared in those final days, got lost in all the speculation. Decades passed, the case went cold, got reopened, went cold again. New detectives inherited the file, pursued new theories, reached the same dead ends. Elizabeth's mother died without ever knowing who killed her daughter. The LAPD officially closed the case in the 1990s, then reopened it when new evidence emerged, then quietly let it fade into the cold case files where it remains today. But people can't let it go, can they? The Black Dahlia has inspired dozens of books, movies, television shows, podcasts. Everyone has a theory. Everyone has a solution. Everyone knows who really did it, if you just look at the evidence the right way. If you just consider this one crucial detail the police overlooked. The truth is probably simpler and more disturbing than any of the elaborate theories. Elizabeth Short was a young woman alone in a dangerous city, and she crossed paths with someone who saw her vulnerability as an opportunity. Someone organized enough to plan, cruel enough to torture, and smart enough to never get caught. She's been dead now for more than 75 years, but every few months someone comes forward with new evidence, a new suspect, a new solution to the puzzle, as if solving it would somehow bring her back, somehow make sense of the senseless thing that happened to her in those final days. Maybe that's what the killer wanted all along. Not just to murder Elizabeth Short, but to create a mystery so compelling, so perfectly noir, that people would never stop talking about it, never stop trying to solve it, never stop feeding the very obsession that led to her death in the first place. The vacant lot where she was found is now a parking lot. No marker, no memorial, just asphalt and painted lines, and the occasional true crime tourist with a camera looking for something that isn't there anymore. Elizabeth Short has become immortal in all the wrong ways, famous for the worst thing that ever happened to her, remembered not for who she was, but for how she died. And somewhere, maybe, her killer lived out their days knowing they'd created the perfect crime. Not perfect because they'd never been caught, but perfect because they'd turned a murder into a legend, a victim into a symbol, a life into a story that would never end.